This is Talking Ears, and this is Office Hours, and I'm in the studio with Juan. Hello, Juan. How you doing?
I'm doing all right, Frank. How are you?
I am great. I would like to open up the mailbag a little bit today. It's something we haven't yet done on the show, but I've been eagerly anticipating this for a while. As you know, we get questions in from people who listen to the show. We get questions from patients. Very often when we get these listener questions, we just answer them privately because you and I are clinicians.
Yeah.
And it feels weird to answer somebody's very, very personal question publicly.
Yeah.
But I realize that some of these questions would probably actually be helpful for everybody to hear the answer to. So perhaps we can answer some questions that many people are thinking without asking, thanks to a few people asking them. Was that a sentence?
It sounded like a sentence. There's words in there. But
There were words. It ended eventually. So any sentence you can walk away from.
Well, I think this is great to open up the mailbox and share some questions that we get on air, so to speak, is a good opportunity to share this information, making it a little bit more accessible.
So this first one, I pulled this one because it actually directly relates to Cyrille's episode that we just released. And this is where a listener asked, and I'll paraphrase, I'm a jazz guitar player. I play in a lot of different groups and settings, not just jazz. And in some of them, it gets very loud. I have been told that I have to wear earplugs by a lot of well-meaning individuals in my life. I have been told to monitor my levels, and in pulling out a sound level meter, I did notice, shockingly, that a quiet jazz gig at a restaurant reached about 102 decibels. So do I actually need to wear earplugs whenever I play, or is it an option where I can pick and choose when to use them? So that is a great question. What do you think, Juan?
For this particular individual, wouldn't be a bad idea to use something at some times, particularly at that venue, but it may not always be necessary for rehearsals or if they're doing an outside gig on their porch or their patio or something. If they actually have a good understanding of what their sound levels are, that can help motivate folks to actually use it in certain situations. May not always even be while they're performing. This is something that Cyrille had mentioned, and so it's not all the time when they're actually playing or performing. Sometimes it's when they're traveling, when they're on tour, going from gig to gig. And that situation would be a good idea, especially if it's an extended gig. If you have several sets, it may not be a bad idea just to give your ears a little bit of a break from that intense loudness. Additionally, it may not always be from the instruments. It could just be from the space itself. If it's a restaurant, it could be just the patrons talking and conversing, could be the kitchen. So it really just depends in that situation.
Yeah. I feel like there's audiologists and well-meaning folks who hear about hearing loss prevention and kind of approach it hyper-diligently, right?
Yeah.
They go into the mindset of you must always protect yourself. And every time that there's music or every time there's any loud sound, you need hearing protection. You know, that kind of safety approach prevents injury, certainly, and prevents risk. But it also may be overprotecting at times. Right. We talk about overprotection with our hearing conservation classes. Just the concept that you're basically causing people to
kind of unnecessarily use something in a situation that isn't necessarily required or even desired.
Yeah. It's like carrying an umbrella when there's no rain. It's like wearing sunscreen when you're inside all day. It's not necessarily harmful in amongst itself, but that's just unnecessary.
Right. Yeah.
And in some cases with hearing protection, it can actually be detrimental to their ability to connect to the environment, to hear a conversation, to perform that day. So we need to be careful when we're telling people to wear earplugs. I kind of think about earplugs kind of like you would think about a medicine. Right? You try to take as little medication as possible. If you don't have a headache, don't take an Advil.
Sure. Yeah.
If the situation doesn't call for hearing protection, then don't wear earplugs. You're just stopping yourself up for no reason.
Yeah. And to go back to the question, when should I use earplugs?
Yeah.
Well, getting an understanding of your sound level exposure,
Hmm.
it's a great, easy way. We have the tools now where just about anyone, almost everybody, has a sound level meter in their pocket.
Yeah.
With the advent of smartphones and apps, it's actually pretty simple to get a pretty good idea of what the loudness is in the environment. And that can help inform you of, hey, I'm going to be in this situation for quite a while. Maybe I should use earplugs for this
Hmm.
situation. So I think that is the start, I think, is
Hmm.
being more conscious, being aware of what loud is, how loud is it, and for how much
Hmm.
time am I going to be hanging out here in this environment. So,
Yeah. And I think that the listener question kind of touched on this in a way that I'm glad we're circling back to it, because they said that it peaked at 102 dB.
mhm, mm,
And we don't know about like the setting. If it's a restaurant gig, maybe there's a drum set. Maybe it's relatively quietly played at that time, though. But 102 dB peak,
yeah,
I'm going to sound like against what it usually sounds like when I'm talking, but that ain't loud,
mm,
right? 102 dB peak is a single clap.
right,
Is they got kind of excited with the brushes on the snare drum during a solo. Like,
sure,
you mentioned apps. We'll talk about like which specific apps depending on the type of device, but we also have to kind of circle back and talk about what numbers are we reading
yeah.
and making informed decisions based on it. Actually, why don't we start there? What apps do you like? You have an Apple device, right?
I do.
iPhone.
And I found the NIOSH SLM app. We're not getting
Hmm.
paid for this sponsorship, but there you go. The NIOSH,
Neither are they.
yeah, yeah. NIOSH is the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, and they are pushing for best practices, best recommendations of how folks can better protect themselves. There's a lot of literature, there's a lot of ongoing research going on with what they put out to help inform people of what is the best way to preserve what you have
Hmm.
and to prevent any injury. When it comes to ears and hearing, they developed their sound level meter app, which can identify and measure how loud a space is.
Hmm.
And so you record the duration that you're in this environment. It'll give you your average to help inform you of what is safe or when would it be a good
Hmm.
idea to use hearing protection.
And a couple quick points about the NIOSH Sound Level Meter app. It is free,
Mhm.
which means it's taxpayer dollar paid for. I believe it's available worldwide. It is only available, however, for iOS devices, so
Mhm.
Apple iPads, iPhones. It comes pre-calibrated because Apple devices are sort of structured in such a way, they're made in such a way where the app knows the exact specs of the microphone attached to that unit.
Mhm.
So that's why it's only available on Apple. The average that you talked about, it's labeled by its scientific name, which is the LEQ, which I believe stands for long-term equivalent average. The LEQ on the screen is actually what you should be looking at.
Mhm.
I really like the NIOSH app because it is labeled really nicely. And if you select anything, it kind of just tells you what the definition is and when you should use it and how you should look at it. But it shows you so much information on that screen. Like it has peak, it has max, which are technically different. It has the LEQ. It'll also show you the weighting, sound weighting, which instead of bogging down this conversation, maybe we should just say probably stick with dBA.
Mhm.
It's a much longer conversation that I just annoyed a bunch of hearing conservationists and industrial hygienists by saying that. But for the time being, we stick with dBA. And you're looking at the LEQ number to see if you're safe. So what's safe? What do you tell people, Juan?
Basically, think the higher the number, the less time we have before something could happen to our ears or to our hearing. So it's important
Yeah.
to take a look at the LEQ rather than a peak, which might be pretty high up, past 100. But what matters most is the LEQ, which is averaging the amount of sound that your ears are getting within that time.
Mm-hmm. So it's important that if you want to know if a concert that you're going to is safe, turn on the recording at the beginning of the show, run it for a couple songs, take a look at that number. If that number is showing you 100 decibels, as you said, according to NIOSH, which is, they're being very careful here with your ears, they would say that 15 minutes is safe at 100 decibels. So if you record for 10 minutes and it says your average is 100 dB, you've only got 5 more minutes left before you're risking your hearing. That's kind of the best way of looking at it. If I was in that situation, I would say, this is a really good circumstance where hearing protection is a great idea. Earplugs are smart at this point. Now, if you're going to be in that situation for 3 hours or 4 hours, let's say it's a festival, you would need more hearing protection sooner than if you're only there. Let's say I'm passing through for 15 minutes just to catch 2 songs of a band. I would be less concerned about that exposure.
Yeah.
So the LEQ really is the key number to be looking at there, and your anticipated duration of exposure. I'll also add that I think 85 is a really helpful number to keep in our heads, right? We're glossing over some major concepts here, but essentially if it's 85 decibels or less on the LEQ, you're safe.
More than likely.
Yeah, you got about 8 hours of exposure that day. So unless you're anticipating 15 or 16 hours of exposure, you're probably going to be safe. Now, your average jazz gig at a restaurant is usually going to be like 75 to 80 dB. So you're probably fine, even if those peaks are reaching up around 100. So you have to be thoughtful about those levels.
And it's also continuous sound, near nonstop at these levels with music, performances, festivals, very dynamic. There can be moments that ebb and flow. I think that's what's so lovely about music, is that there's a lot of light and shade, loud and quiet. There are moments that we have a little bit of a reprieve from that constant loudness. So one thing to note with these numbers as well is that they were developed and established by occupational noise, not music.
It's a really good point. I know that there are some people right now working on getting a better scale, because we keep talking about NIOSH and OSHA. It's very much occupational health and safety, non-musical things. In fact, one of the working groups leading that charge includes Michael Lawrence, past guest on this show, is working on developing a new scale for how we should be looking at sound level meters with music exposure and really understand this better. I'll also point out that it's probably not necessary to point out, maybe I'm going in the weeds too much, but in the US, we talk about a 24-hour time window where your exposure kind of adds up over 24 hours. And then we assume the next day you're fine to just go listen again to another 24 hours worth of music or sound or whatever. In the EU and most of the rest of the world, they're now using a weekly time scale where they'll say you're allowed 20 hours per week at this level or 10 hours per week at this level, which is scientifically actually probably a lot more accurate for how our ears actually handle this stuff.
I think a lot more helpful for what we're trying to convey here is when would it be a good idea to use earplugs? It's information that we're trying to convey with our audiences and with our listeners. How can I keep my ears safe? Getting awareness of your sound exposures. And if we take a look at a kind of a weekly approach, I think that is just going to overall have some better insight.
And I think it lines up more with most people's work lives, most musicians' work lives especially, because, Monday may look very different from Friday, right? And so if you're thinking about daily exposures, you have to separate out, is this a show day? Is this a rehearsal day? Is this a studio day? Is this a travel day? Am I teaching today? Am I just in my home studio? Doing a weekly thing, you can say, look, I got 4 gigs this week, 2 recording sessions, and 6 students. How do I add that all up together and get a sense of my exposure risk this week? I like that a lot better, to be honest. For the sake of not just focusing on Apple products, there are some apps available for Android phones. The one that I like to use is called Decibel X. There's a free version. It's great. So we don't get paid by them either. There's about, 100 other sound level meter apps out there. But the one piece that you're going to want to look out for is that it's just not a number on the screen bouncing around with no other information. You have to be looking for the one that shows you an average. So it's going to be doing an LEQ, some dosimetry is what it's called when you do a long-term average, because otherwise it's not a very useful metric to be using. Let's see, Juan, you also mentioned, other than sound level meters, another way of knowing if your ears are at risk. And I love that you brought this up. Idea that your ears will fatigue at a certain point.
Yeah.
We call it temporary threshold shift. Your ears have temporarily decreased in their sensitivity. Sometimes you get tinnitus or tinnitus along with it. Sometimes you have some kind of muffling and pressury feeling along with it. Once that's happened, what is your encouragement for people to do?
Be mindful of how often that's happening. It's your body letting you know that that was a little too much, actually. So,
but isn't it your body letting you know that you've rocked hard enough?
Isn't
it a badge of honor?
I mean, back in my day, at shows, I get it. You wake up the next morning, you got metal neck and you got the ear hangover and you feel great after that. And it's proof, other than the t-shirt that you bought, that it was a fantastic show. However, too many of those do add up and there can be differences later on. It's a way that your body is saying, hey, that was a little too much. And just to continue enjoying music that way, I think the real badge of honor is being able to continue going to shows and not being affected by it or having an altered experience every time you go. An altered experience being, can't really understand the lyrics now, can't hear the guitar solos, the ringing is constantly going off, and so I think that's the real badge of honor.
Ooh. So you're saying health and wellness is the badge of honor?
Not my words, but that's your interpretation. That's fine.
It's the same thing with any indulgence, right? Like if you sit down at a restaurant and you eat the 90-ounce steak and you get your picture on the wall, but you can't walk for a week, did you really win? Did you really succeed? Did you really get a success? I consider a successful meal nowadays when I walk away and I feel good, not bad.
Right.
Right? So think of it like that with a concert. If you walk away and you say, that was incredible, I got to hear all the music, and I'll get to hear the rest of the music for the rest of my life because I didn't burn out my ears with this one show. It's also another way, if you're a music listener, if you're an audience member, it's a way of respecting the music too, because you're saying, I want to hear this for the rest of my life. If you're a performer, it's a way of respecting the audience and saying, I want to be able to perform this for you for the rest of your life. It's not a one and done thing. I don't like seeing people abuse themselves on stage. It's not fun to watch. I like seeing people who respect their ears and respect their bodies and respect their health. So yeah, that hangover, as you put it, that temporary threshold shift, that ear fatigue afterwards should be seen as a call to action, because unlike a muscle fatigue or a joint fatigue, it doesn't bounce back. And in the case of muscles, you get stronger. In the case of ear health, there may be permanent damage every time that happens. So listen to your ears. Back to the jazz guitarist. If you are leaving that show thinking, man, my ears are just muffled, my ringing is up, then combine that with your sound level meter and say, I should have worn earplugs. Next time I come back to this gig or next time in a similar setting, I'm going to wear hearing protection, right? We learn from our past and we do better in the future. But if you walk away from that gig and you say, that was dynamic, the loud parts were punchy and impactful, the quiet parts I could hear clearly without earplugs in, and my ears feel great afterwards, then you have the answer right there. Right? Combine a little sound level metering and you'll know, actually the LEQ of that restaurant gig was 82. no need for hearing
Right,
protection.
right.
This applies to rehearsals too. I'll go into rehearsals for pretty loud groups and help out with their ears, and we'll measure the rehearsal space, and it'll be 95 LEQ. They're rehearsing for 2 hours. And they say, do I need to wear earplugs in this space? And I say, no. If this is all your sound exposure for the day, you're kind of right at that cusp of where this is safe. If you're all feeling good, then we're not in a bad situation.
Right.
Some people will choose to wear protection for the loudest parts or the loudest songs, or just when their ears start showing that they're fatigued. But there is kind of this middle ground, and maybe the best way, and maybe we should have just said this and not answered this question for 30 minutes, was it's individual. So if you don't know the answer, talk with an audiologist who can work with you and develop a individualized plan. Start measuring your sound levels and listen to your ears and see what they tell you.
One quick thing that I'll add, knowing your sound levels, awesome. Knowing your hearing profile, knowing where your hearing is at, understanding your hearing health. If we acquire your auditory thresholds, basically doing a hearing test, we have a picture. We have a way to make sure and monitor that how you're using your ears is not changing year after year. So never a bad idea to have your hearing tested once a year.
I think we have time for one more question. I did want to add one more thing in here, though, that when we talk about hearing protection, not all earplugs are made the same, right? If you're talking about those orange foam plugs that you get at the hardware store, those are completely a different animal than filtered earplugs, and those can even work differently than custom filtered earplugs. So if you've been in this person's perspective where you're like, I don't know if these really worked for me, I don't know if I have to wear these, it might be that you're using this wrong type for that setting. I know some people who just say no to foam in the music world. I kind of like that. If it's a filtered earplug, it doesn't have to be expensive, but as long as it says music and it's made for music, it's probably better than foam. And then talk with us if you want to talk about something like a filtered or a custom filtered earplug that allows you to customize it, select your attenuation levels, and be able to trust the sonic experience coming out of it every day, so you can mix and produce and rehearse and perform all while being protected. We have one more question. This is a pretty quick one, and I guess it's kind of related. The listener asked, where did the name Talking Ears come from?
Frank's mind.
Which is well, it's interesting. You were privy to that early conversation.
I was, yeah. What were we doing? Brainstorming ideas, yeah. So.
Do you remember the bad name that I originally had as the working title for this show?
Why Loud?
Why Loud? Yeah. I have a folder on my computer called Why Loud Podcast, and that is where all of the sessions go. It's not the name of the podcast. Yeah. It was a funny question that I always had of why loud? Why do we care so much about loudness, and why do we, as humans, do that? You were completely correct, and so was Mary. Would not have been a good name for the show.
But to answer why loud, because loud is fun. It feels good. And music's awesome when it's loud. I love it. Yeah.
Yep. End of show.
Yeah.
Yep. 2 episodes. No more conversation to be had. Have a good day. And then we would have been like every other podcast that doesn't get past 7 episodes. So we put our brains together, and as a perennial fan of talking heads, talking ears kind of came out of that as kind of a we're talking about the only part of the heads that I care about, which is the ears. I don't know if this was something that we thought of at the time, but I had a patient who recently, when I told him the name of the podcast, it was a tinnitus patient, and he said, that's funny because that's how he refers to his ears to his family members when they say like, what's going on with your ears? And he has to describe tinnitus to them. He just says, it just sounds like my ears are just talking to me. So I just have talking ears today. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, cease and desist. It's the name of our show.
I think we need to give him credit now then. So.
No, well, it was after.
Oh, it was after.
It was after
okay.
our show. I will have my lawyers talk to him and tell him to not use that anecdote anymore. All right, I think that sums up our office hours for the day. I appreciate you hanging out with me, Juan.
Yeah, thanks, Frank, and thank you for the listeners' questions. Keep them coming. This was a lot of fun, and keep the questions coming in.
Yep, we have a lot more to answer and a lot more to think about, but your questions kind of spur us into these angles of conversation. If you haven't listened yet to Cyrille's episode, Cyrille Aimee is an incredible jazz singer. We talk a little bit about when you don't need hearing protection during that episode, but we were mostly focused on how amazing Costa Rica is and her life down there and her incredible career on and off the stage. So go back and listen to that episode, and maybe it'll give us a little bit more context to how we just answered this listener's question. All right. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks, Juan.
Thanks, Frank.
Talking Ears is a production of Earmark Hearing Conservation and Philadelphia Music Audiology. The show is produced by Juan Vasquez and Mary Kim, and the theme music is by Scott Hallam. You can find more of Scott's music at audiodowsing.com. Music heard in this episode is from an album I did a while ago called Cafe Ensemble, and that's also available on Audio Dowsing's Bandcamp. If you would like to support the show, the biggest step you can take is leaving us a review wherever you listen to your shows and podcasts. You can also subscribe and follow us on social medias, and please just share the show with your friends, your colleagues, your students, your teachers, your barista, whoever you come across in your daily travels. Just stop them and tell them that they need to go listen to the show that talks about ears. While you're at it, ask them what their favorite sound is. You know, we don't talk about that enough, so let's start doing that on the streets. Grassroots efforts, guys. As always, thanks for listening.